Sir, we have standards here. We don't serve people dressed like that, sneered the manager, his voice loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. The room fell silent as Walter Hayes, in his patched coat, lowered his eyes. Without a word, Walter straightened his beret, clutched it tight, and stepped into the cold. Dignity intact despite the sting of humiliation. Snow swirled outside the Palmetto Grill as he walked slowly toward the bus stop. Then, tires screeched on the icy street. A black SUV stopped. A tall man leapt out, eyes locked on the insignia on that beret. "Wait!" he shouted, rushing through the snow. The restaurant froze as he burst in, holding up the badge like a relic. Who humiliated this man? What happened next changed the town forever. Walter Hayes wasn't always the quiet old man shuffling through the snow, his coat patched at the elbows, his beret worn thin. Decades earlier, he was known among a tight circle of men as someone you wanted beside you in the worst moments of war. Walter had served as a Navy SEAL from the height of the Cold War through the early 1980s, a career that took him from the jungles of Vietnam to the harsh deserts of the Middle East. He wasn't the loudest, the strongest, or the most decorated by choice. He was the man who stayed calm when radios went dead and the night grew too quiet. He was the one who carried wounded comrades on his back for miles because leaving them wasn't an option. There were missions Walter never spoke of, not because he couldn't remember, but because remembering brought ghosts. A hostage extraction in 1972 that saved a diplomat's family at the cost of two teammates. A reconnaissance deep behind enemy lines in 1979, where Walter improvised a way out, navigating through minefields by memory after their maps were lost in a river crossing. The mission most seared into his bones, though, was in 1983 along a desolate stretch of the Pakistan border. His unit had been tasked with recovering an American intelligence team pinned down by hostile forces. Extraction was declared impossible by command. Walter disagreed. Against orders, he led a small band of men through the mountains, locating the survivors and drawing fire upon himself to give them a chance to escape. He was shot twice that night and left for dead, till a local farmer found him days later. His right arm would never fully heal, the bones shattered and fused awkwardly. His lungs would forever carry the damage of that cold, thin mountain air, mingled with smoke and blood. The medals came: Silver Star, Bronze Star, citations buried under redacted lines. But Walter declined ceremonies. "I just did my job," he'd say, his voice soft but firm, his eyes already looking past the conversation. Returning to civilian life wasn't easy. The government checks covered basic needs, but Walter never lived for comfort. He bought a modest cabin outside Charleston, planted a vegetable garden, and tried to live simply. What the neighbors saw was a quiet man who fixed things without being asked. If a storm knocked down a fence, Walter was the first to show up with his toolbox. When old Mrs. Donnelly's porch steps rotted through, Walter replaced them. When Mr. Lewis's roof began to sag under the weight of a late snow, Walter was on a ladder before anyone else thought to call for help. These acts weren't done for thanks. Most people didn't even know it was him. He worked early or late, often vanishing before dawn. Light revealed the repairs. He did it because it needed to be done, because once upon a time he'd been trained to see what was broken and make it whole, to protect without expectation of praise. Once at the small-town grocery store, Walter stood in line behind a young woman cradling a toddler on her hip, her hands trembling as she counted change. She came up short. The clerk, already impatient, tapped his fingers on the counter. Before she could gather the courage to decide what to put back, Walter slipped a bill from his wallet and placed it quietly on the counter. "Take care of that for both of us," he said softly. The woman's eyes filled with tears, but before she could thank him, Walter had tipped his beret and stepped out into the night. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't expect to see her again. That wasn't the point. There are thousands like Walter in this country, men and women who bore the burden of service, came home marked by invisible wounds, and quietly carried on. They don't wear their medals at the diner or brag at the bar. They're the ones who sweep the church steps on Saturday morning, who clear the neighbor's driveway without being asked, who notice the kid without a winter coat and find a way to deliver one without fanfare. The trouble is, too few notice them until a moment of injustice forces everyone to look. That's the burden of the quiet hero, to do what's right and expect nothing, to be seen only when the world realizes too late what it almost ignored. Walter didn't think of himself as heroic. He thought of himself as lucky, to have made it back, to have a roof overhead, to have two good legs that still carried him through the woods on mornings when the air was clear and the world was still. And yet, for all his humility, the town was about to learn just how much one quiet man could change everything. The Palmetto Grill bustled that afternoon. Soft jazz played beneath the gentle clatter of silverware and glass. The smell of grilled ribs and garlic bread filled the warm air. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing Charleston in white. Inside, all seemed normal, until the door opened and an elderly man stepped inside, bringing with him a gust of cold. Walter Hayes stood at the threshold, his patched coat buttoned tight, his boots worn thin at the soles. His beret, faded and frayed, rested carefully on his silver hair. His blue eyes, though kind, carried the weight of decades. The hostess hesitated, taking in his appearance, the mended sleeves, the scuffed shoes, and offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Table for one, please," Walter said softly, his voice clear but humble. Before the hostess could respond, Logan Pierce, the manager, approached. Tall, polished, his suit crisp, Logan's gaze swept over Walter like a man inspecting a problem. "I'm afraid we're full today," Logan said smoothly, though several empty tables were clearly visible. Walter glanced at the room. "It looks like you have space. I don't mind waiting if needed." Logan's smile thinned. "Sir, we have standards here. We don't serve people dressed like that." A few heads turned. Conversations faltered. The warmth in the room seemed to dim. Walter's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't argue. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small worn wallet. "I have money. I just wanted to try your ribs. My wife used to—" He stopped himself. Ethan Brooks, a young waiter eager to impress, stepped forward with a smirk. "Time to go, Grandpa. Don't bring down the atmosphere. There's a soup kitchen 2 blocks down." Logan nodded in approval. "Please escort him out, Ethan." Walter, face flushing with humiliation, nodded slightly. "No need. I can see myself out." As he turned, his beret slipped from his head, falling to the floor. The tiny insignia pinned to it glinted beneath the restaurant's lights, a symbol few recognized, but one that had once meant everything. Ethan sneered. "Dropped your hat." Neither he nor Logan made a move to pick it up. Walter bent slowly, joints stiff, and retrieved it himself, brushing off the dust. With quiet precision, he set it back on his head, squared his shoulders, and walked out into the cold. Moments later, a black SUV pulled into the lot, tires crunching over packed snow. Owen Carter stepped out, adjusting his coat against the wind. A man in his 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples and eyes sharp from decades of watching, deciding, leading. He had come for ribs. Simple as that. But as he approached the grill's entrance, something dark, half buried in the snow, caught his eye. He bent down, brushing away the ice. His heart stopped. It was a beret, worn, frayed, and pinned to it, a symbol that turned the world beneath his feet upside down. A flash of memory. Beirut, 1983. His team trapped, wounded, outnumbered. A figure emerging through smoke and ruin, a beret with that insignia visible through the chaos. A man who dragged him from death's door, who stayed behind so others could live. A man he'd believed lost forever. His breath formed clouds in the air. His pulse thundered in his ears. He turned, scanning the street, and there, just beyond the corner, he saw him, the stooped figure walking toward the bus stop, beret now clutched tightly in his hand. "Wait!" Owen called, his voice cutting through the storm. But Walter didn't stop. Whether from shame, fatigue, or not hearing, he kept moving. Owen didn't hesitate. He strode through the doors of the Palmetto Grill, boots wet with snow, his presence filling the space like a sudden storm. The room fell silent. Diners froze, forks halfway to mouths. Logan straightened, confusion flickering across his face. Ethan stepped back instinctively. Owen held up the beret as if it were a sacred relic. His eyes locked on Logan and Ethan. His voice was low, steady, but carried the weight of authority that brooked no argument. "Who humiliated this man?" Logan swallowed hard, searching for words. "Sir, this isn't what it looks like." Owen cut him off. It looks like you threw out a man of honor because his coat was patched, because his boots were old. That man saved my life, saved the lives of my team. While we ran for safety, he stayed behind. 40 years ago in Beirut, Walter Hayes fought so I and others could live. And today you turned him out into the cold because of the clothes on his back? A wave of shame swept through the room. Diners looked down at their plates, at their hands. The weight of Owen's words pressed on every heart. He scanned the faces before him. In our culture today, how often do we judge a man by his clothes? His shoes? We think we know someone by what they wear, what they own. But we don't see the battles they've fought, the sacrifices they've made, the quiet dignity with which they carry on. We don't see the man beneath. Logan stammered, "Sir, we didn't know." Owen raised a hand. "You didn't ask." For a moment, no one spoke. Then as Owen's words hung heavy in the air, something shifted. The Palmetto Grill, once just a restaurant, had become a reckoning. A place where pretense was stripped away, where truth demanded to be seen. And outside in the falling snow, the man they'd cast out kept walking, unaware that his quiet dignity had just awakened the conscience of an entire town. The air inside the Palmetto Grill was so thick with tension that you could almost hear people's hearts beating. Owen Carter stood tall, beret still clutched in his hand, his breath steady despite the storm of emotions raging beneath the surface. The weight of what had just transpired seemed to hang in the space between him and the staff, between him and the diners who had witnessed everything but said nothing. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Owen reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed. His voice was calm but resolute. "Get the paperwork started. I want the Palmetto Grill under contract within the hour. No delays, I'm buying it." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Logan Pierce, the manager, blinked, his mouth opening and closing, like a man trying to find his footing in an earthquake. Sir, what are you saying? You can't just..." Owen turned to him, eyes steady and cold. "I can, and I am." His tone left no room for debate. "You humiliated a man of honor, a man who deserves a seat at any table in this country. You judged him by his coat, by his boots, and not by his soul. That tells me everything I need to know about how you run this place." Logan tried again, his voice quivering now. "I didn't mean any harm, I swear. It was just policy. Standards, to protect the restaurant's image." Owen raised a hand, silencing him. He spoke loud enough for all to hear. "You're fired, effective immediately." A hush fell, broken only by the soft clink of a fork dropped by a stunned diner. Logan paled, his face a portrait of disbelief and humiliation. He stepped back, glancing around for support that didn't come. The waiter, Ethan, shifted awkwardly, looking anywhere but at Owen. Owen took a slow breath and turned to face the room. "From this moment forward," he declared, "this restaurant will have a new mission. The Palmetto Grill is no longer just a place for fine dining. It's a place where dignity is served first. From now on, no veteran will ever be turned away, no matter what they wear, no matter what they own, no matter how they look. If you've served this country, you'll always have a seat at this table." The impact of his words rippled outward, softening hardened faces, drawing downcast eyes. Some diners shifted uncomfortably, realizing their silence had made them complicit. Others nodded quietly, as if acknowledging a truth they'd long forgotten. Owen glanced down at the bray in his hand, and then out through the window at the figure of Walter Hayes, still visible at the bus stop, waiting with the quiet patience of a man used to being overlooked. Owen's heart ached, not with pity, but with respect, and with shame that it had taken this moment for anyone to see what had been in front of them all along. He pocketed the beret gently, as though cradling a treasure, and spoke again, this time softer, more reflective. "It's easy to talk about changing the world, but most of the time, it doesn't take grand speeches or massive gestures. Sometimes all it takes is one small action, offering a seat, showing respect, opening a door. And when we do, when we choose decency over judgment, kindness over convenience, that's how we transform a community." The restaurant seemed to exhale as one. Diners who had sat frozen moments before now began to nod, to murmur agreement, to shift as if awakening from a daze. A woman at a corner table wiped her eyes with a napkin, A father reached over and squeezed his daughter's hand, as if to say, "Remember this." Owen stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. "If you'll excuse me, I have someone I need to thank properly." He strode outside, the door swinging closed behind him with a soft chime. The snow fell thick and quiet, muffling the world, but inside the Palmetto Grill was forever changed. In the days that followed, the change became visible. The paperwork went through as Owen promised. Fast, clean, decisive. The new ownership was announced in the local paper, accompanied by a statement: Palmetto Grill, where service is served. The dress code policy was the first to go, replaced with a code of dignity and welcome. A sign was hung in the window, a simple American flag with the words "Veterans Always Welcome." Owen appointed a new manager, a retired Marine sergeant who understood what it meant to lead with integrity. Staff were retrained, not just in hospitality, but in humanity. And every Sunday, the grill offered free meals to veterans, a quiet thanks, served hot. But perhaps most importantly, the spirit of the town shifted. Inspired by what had happened, other businesses began to follow suit. Coffee shops introduced suspended coffees, prepaid drinks that could be claimed by those in need. The hardware store offered discounts to service members, past and present. The library started a program where veterans could share their stories with local students, all because one man saw beyond a tattered coat. All because he chose to act, not just feel. And the Palmetto Grill became, in its own small way, a beacon, not just of good food, but of what's possible when a community chooses to see the worth in every person who walks through its doors. By nightfall, the story had already started to spread. A diner's shaky phone video captured the moment Owen Carter stormed into the Palmetto Grill. Beret raised, his voice ringing out, "Who humiliated this man?" The clip hit social media like a spark to dry grass. By morning, the local news stations had picked it up, playing the footage on repeat. The headline read, "Veteran shamed, billionaire steps in, changes town forever." What began as a moment of outrage quickly transformed into a groundswell of support. People who had watched from the sidelines, who had averted their eyes when Walter Hayes was pushed out the door, suddenly felt compelled to act. The story touched something deeper, a recognition of how easy it is to overlook quiet heroism and how vital it is to honor it when we can. The first to respond were the neighbors, the same folks who had seen Walter walk by for years carrying groceries for elderly residents or fixing a broken porch step without asking for thanks. Now realized they'd taken his quiet service for granted. Mrs. Donnelly, who lived 2 houses down from Walter's cabin, was the first to speak up at a town meeting. "It shouldn't have taken a public shaming for us to see what kind of man Walter is. We need to do better." Inspired by that sentiment, the community organized its first Veteran Appreciation dinner at the Palmetto Grill. The event was simple: long tables, homemade food, and no speeches, just fellowship. Veterans from all generations came, many for the first time sharing parts of their stories. The town's high school jazz band played softly in the background. A banner, hand-painted by local children, hung across the back wall. "Thank you for your service. We see you." The dinners became a monthly tradition. Each one drew more people, veterans, their families, and civilians alike. And each gathering sparked more conversations, more connections, more understanding. What had started as a gesture of apology became a celebration of resilience and community. The ripple effect extended beyond the grill's walls. The town's elementary school teachers encouraged their students to write letters to Walter. Dozens of notes filled his mailbox in the weeks that followed. "Thank you for being brave," one child wrote in crayon, alongside a drawing of a stick figure soldier with a big smile. "I hope when I'm older, I can help people too." Another note read, the letters uneven but sincere. Walter, overwhelmed by the outpouring, kept every letter in a wooden box by his favorite chair. On quiet evenings, he would open the box and reread them. Heart full, the sting of that humiliating day at the restaurant softened by the kindness that followed. Meanwhile, Owen kept his promise to make the Palmetto Grill a place of honor. Each Wednesday became Veterans Night, when the restaurant opened its doors to veterans for free or discounted meals. But more than that, it became a space where stories could be shared, where bonds could be built. The back room was transformed into a kind of informal hall of honor, its walls lined with photographs and memorabilia donated by local veterans and their families. There was no agenda, no formality, just a place to gather, to laugh, to remember. Seeing the impact of these efforts, Owen and a small group of local business owners took the next step. They launched the Palmetto Veterans Foundation, dedicated to supporting struggling veterans in the region. The foundation's first initiative was simple but powerful, funding meals at local establishments for any veteran in need, no questions asked. From there, it grew to provide assistance with utility bills, job placement services, and connections to mental health resources. Donations poured in, not just from corporations and wealthy benefactors, but from everyday townsfolk who wanted to contribute. A retired teacher pledged part of her pension. The owner of a local hardware store set up a donation jar at the register, matching every dollar given. Even the town's Little League team hosted a charity game, the proceeds going to the foundation. But perhaps the most profound change was harder to quantify. It was in the way people began to look at one another, the way they paused before making assumptions, the way they greeted Walter now, not with pity, but with genuine respect. The way children pointed out veterans they saw on the street to their parents, eager to share what they'd learned. Walter, for his part, remained the same quiet man he'd always been. He still fixed fences and carried groceries. He still waved politely at neighbors and slipped out of gatherings before the applause could find him. But those around him had changed. The town had changed. In the end, what had started as a moment of shame became a catalyst for lasting good. A reminder that small acts of kindness can ripple outward, reshaping hearts, rebuilding trust, restoring honor. And that sometimes it takes a single voice, raised in defense of what's right, to awaken a community to its better self. The weeks after that fateful day at the Palmetto Grill brought a kind of attention Walter Hayes had never wanted and certainly never sought. Local reporters called. Veterans groups invited him to speak. Even a major news network ran a segment on the humble hero of Charleston. But Walter, true to his nature, declined each invitation with quiet grace. He hadn't lived his life for headlines. The praise made him uneasy, as though it somehow cheapened the service he had given and the sacrifices of those who hadn't made it home. Whenever someone pressed him for an interview, he'd simply shake his head, smile faintly, and say, "I'm just an old man trying to mind his business." Walter's one request of Owen, after all the dust settled, was modest to the point of invisibility. "I don't want special treatment," he told him. "Just give me a small table by the window, somewhere I can drink my coffee and watch the world go by." And so it was. At the Palmetto Grill, now rebranded with its new mission of honor and hospitality, there was always a small table in the corner, by the big window that overlooked Main Street. It wasn't marked with a plaque or roped off from others. It was simply understood. That was Walter's place. He'd arrive most mornings just after 8, wearing his cleanest shirt, his boots polished as best he could manage, and his old beret, now restored to its former dignity. He didn't come for free meals or to be recognized. He came for the simple pleasure of black coffee in the morning sun, of watching life unfold outside. The school buses rumbling past, shopkeepers sweeping their stoops, young couples walking hand in hand through the snow or spring rain. It grounded him, reminded him that while his part might have been small, he had done his duty so this world could go on. The staff, at first eager to serve him with extra attention, soon learned that Walter preferred simplicity. He'd tip his head in thanks but never made a fuss. He'd pay for his coffee, leave a quiet tip, and slip out as quietly as he came. What drew people to him, though, wasn't just his history. It was the quiet wisdom that seemed to radiate from him, the sense that here was a man who had seen the worst of the world, but still chose to believe in its goodness. Children would approach him sometimes, drawn by the stories their parents had told, or simply by the kind look in his eyes. And Walter always had time for them. He'd listen to their chatter about school or their dreams of becoming firefighters or teachers or soldiers. And when they asked, as they often did, "Mr. Hayes, were you really a hero?" he'd smile gently and say, "A hero? No, I just did my part, and you can too." It was the older kids, the ones standing at life's crossroads, who seemed to seek him out most. They came with questions about choices, about right and wrong, about how to make a difference in a noisy, complicated world. Walter's advice was always the same, given with quiet conviction. You don't need a title or a uniform to do what's right. You just need to see what's needed and step up. That's all. And most times it's the small things that matter most. These words, simple as they were, found their way into hearts. A young man who once planned to leave town without saying goodbye to his ailing father chose instead to stay and help. A high school senior, inspired by Walter's humility, organized a clothing drive for veterans in need. A group of students started a project recording local veteran stories, not to post online, but to preserve in the town library, where history lived quietly as Walter did. Walter never sought to lead, but led he did, by example, by kindness, by reminding those around him that dignity isn't found in medals or headlines, but in how one chooses to live every day. And so, the man who had been overlooked, dismissed, and humiliated that cold winter day became, in the end, a quiet beacon for his town. Not because he demanded it, but because he embodied what so many had forgotten, that true strength is often silent, and true greatness asks for nothing in return. Time moved on, but the memory of what happened at the Palmetto Grill lingered like a gentle echo across the town. No grand speeches were made, no parades marched through Main Street. Instead, something quieter, and perhaps more meaningful, took root in people's hearts. At the entrance of the Palmetto Grill, just beside the door where Walter Hayes had once been turned away, a small bronze plaque was mounted. It wasn't large or flashy, just a humble square of metal, polished to a soft shine by the hands of those who paused to touch it as they passed. The words engraved upon it were simple, but they carried the weight of generations, in honor of those who served and still serve in spirit. This plaque wasn't only for Walter, though his story had inspired it. It stood for every man and woman who had served their country in ways both great and small, in uniform and out, on the battlefield and at home. It stood for those who had given much and asked for little, whose names would never appear in textbooks but whose sacrifices shaped the world we live in. Day by day, people in town began to notice the plaque. Veterans would pause and bow their heads. Children would ask their parents what it meant. Some folks, who once might have rushed by without a thought, now stopped to reflect, even if just for a moment. And so, we ask you, what does it really mean to honor veterans today? Is it something we do once or twice a year, on Memorial Day or Veterans Day? Or is it a way of seeing, a way of choosing each day to notice the quiet strength in those around us? To offer respect not because of what someone wears or owns, but because of who they are and what they have done? Perhaps honoring veterans means recognizing the small, quiet moments of courage that surround us. The neighbor who checks in on an elderly resident, the stranger who helps carry heavy bags, the man who stands a little straighter when he sees the flag raised. These are the daily acts of service, of dignity, of quiet heroism that often go unnoticed but shape the soul of a community. We invite you to be part of this reflection. Share in the comments. Have you ever witnessed a quiet act of heroism? How did it touch you? If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who could use a reminder of what real service looks like. Because sometimes it's the quietest heroes who leave the deepest mark. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.